Hi everyone, this is Sharon. Today I have a flip through of my very first Christmas journal for 2025. I usually like to make one 12 Days of Christmas journal each year, and so that is the first one I worked on this year. I tied this journal up with this beautiful hand-dyed velvet ribbon. It's a silk ribbon, and I also put on this beaded buckle. I don't know if you can see that, some little glass beads in there. So if we remove that, I also cinched it up a bit with this twine because it's a very chunky journal and I just wanted to kind of keep it from springing open too far. So this is the cover. I use this sepia colored Christmas tree image. I just love that. And I just added a little bit of sparkle for the star at the top, and then I added this label that says 12 Days of Christmas. And then I layered this up with some old book page behind it. On the spine, I covered that with this little piece of delicate lace. And I used this old book cover. It's a really deep maroon color. I love it for Christmas. And then as we open up and go on inside, for my inside covers, I've used these antique book pages, and then I just added some labels, one to the front and one to the back. And then for my spine, I covered that with this pale blue, kind of a tone-on-tone damask fabric. I found this 12 Days of Christmas digital kit, and it is by far my favorite that I've ever worked with. And this is by Megan at the Paper Mill Download, and I will put a link to this kit in my description down below. I will have this journal for sale in my Etsy shop if you would like to check that out. So heading on through, she's got beautiful images for the 12 days, and then she also had these kind of labels in her kit as well. So here we've got our partridge in a pear tree. I made a pocket with that image, and then in there I just have this journaling card with Old Saint Nick on the front. This is an old menu image. Here I created a pocket with this lace image, and then I just added a label there. And then in there I tucked this piece. It's a little trifold piece that I made, so it's got this beautiful Christmas image on the back. And I just used this medallion for my clasp. And then in here I included this beautiful winter scene on vellum. And just added a little bit of lace there and some trim at the top. And then I've got some lined paper for journaling, and then this Christmas book page image in the back. I have several images, this one, and I think this one also came from there. I've got a Christmas kit in my Etsy shop of, it's an old antique Christmas book that I have with images and music and things in it. On this side of the page, I have clipped on this little card. I love to include deer in my winter and Christmas journals. So I've got this on the front, and then it was a tag, so I brought it around and stitched across the top to create this little tuck. And then I just got an old book page in there. And then this came out of a vintage book that I had. It says, To Marilyn from Mother, Christmas 1948. I just did a little stenciling on there, and there's lots of room for journaling on the inside of that. This is an old French embroidery book page. Here I've got this image of Santa, and then some embossed paper and a label on there. And then here we've got our two turtle doves. Love that image. And then in that pocket I've got this tag that I made. And then I've got several book pages from the Silver Skates book that I have, an old vintage book. And this was a list of illustrations. Here on this side of the page, I created a fabric flip with this beautiful old piece of lace. I'm working my way out of this. I've got a few pieces of that left. Here I've got another pocket, and I just trimmed it with some wool fabric and a full button. And then in there I've got this journaling card I made from this image of an old postcard. And I just did some stamping on the back. And then this is a waxed piece. It's an image of a vintage menu. And then on the top, I just added this little tuck at the top. Here, I love this image of this girl all dressed up for winter. And I just put her on the page with these 4 photo corners. Here we've got our 3 French hens, and I glued that image down to the page, and then I just wrapped this twine around it and added a little bow on there. Here I use this beautiful fabric for my pocket, added a couple of labels, and then in there I've got this piece that I made, just a little folio type thing. I've got some little journaling cards in there, one on each side. And then I've also got this original antique postcard. And then this page is a page from a French notebook. Here I just added a little bit of embossed trim on my pocket. And then in there, I've got this journaling card that I made. Backed it with some ledger paper. And then this is a page that I took out of a vintage Christmas book that I have. Some beautiful old Christmas images in there. Here we have our 4 calling birds, and I created a top tuck with that. These background pages are from some of Megan's other Christmas kits. I'll try to link as much as I can of what I use for digitals in this journal. So here I've got another page from that old Silver Skates book, and I added some of my watercolor swatches on there. And then I've got this trim piece, which I wrapped around and created a little side tuck. And then I have this journaling card with this woman. I love that image. Added a little laundry label to the top and some punching on the side. And then some room to write on the back. Here I've got another kind of a double pocket. So I've got this card, this image of the church door. And then this card that I made. This is a lace pocket on the back side, so you could use that to tuck something in. And use this beautiful washi tape from Lace Boutique 1 in the middle. Here again, I use that beautiful brown and turquoise fabric, and I added a button and some paper on there. And then in that tuck, I've got another journaling card that I made. And then this card, got some punch paper across the bottom. This is an old fly sheet from an antique book that I have. And these, I've got several of these. They're old antique French postcards that I have in my collection. Here I clipped on this couple. I love that they're all dressed up in their winter garb. This is an original photo. And then I just did some collaging on this page in the background. Here I've got this beautiful French fabric that I used as my page. And then here we've got our golden rings, and I just added some nice sparkle to that ring. On this page, again, I've got an old vintage French notebook for my page. And then I created this journaling card and just added a little bit of glitter on there. I think you can see it. And then I did some stenciling on the back side. On this side, I just created this little flip out. I also did some punching on that page. And then I've got this journaling card that I made. And then I've got this antique canceled check from 1908 in this beautiful blue color. Here in the center on my strings, I just added some pretty old lace. And then we've got our geese of laying here. And I just created these little tabs with some black velvet ribbon. And then have this card tucked in there. Some old German book page on the back of that. Here I use this plaid image for my pocket and just added a little label on there. And then in that pocket, I've got some, this is an antique piece. It's like an old, I don't know if it's a advertising piece or calling card. It's plain, but it's embossed if you can tell. And then I've got this little card that I made. On this side, I've got this piece. I've got one of those Christmas book pages on the back. And then on this side, I have this nice, beautiful winter scene. And I just did some stenciling with paste on there. And then here, I've got another old book page. Added this metallic trim. And then on this side, I tucked in this tag. Beautiful winter scene on there. And the back, and then this is some antique wallpaper on the front. Here I've got another tag that I created that I tucked in there. It's got this unique belt that I used as a pocket, so I just tucked in this little card on some handmade paper, and then I added this gold fabric for my tab. Here I created this pocket, and I just have this little tag in there. The other side of that fabric page, and I just, with a rusty pin, pinned on this old piece of lace. Here we've got our swans of swimming, and I just created a tuck with that image and added some of my watercolor on some old ledger. And then in that pocket, I've got this tag that I made. A little bit of wool fabric on there. This is actually a belly band on the back, so you could tuck something in there. And then I've got this, it's an old page from a book called Theoretical and Practical Bookkeeping. It's from the 1800s. It's just got some beautiful script and typography in that book. Here I clipped on this piece that I made. This is some antique music sheet, and I just did a little bit of embossing or stenciling with some paste on there with the snowflakes. And then this is a piece that I made. So I took this velvet ribbon and strung it through this strip of paper. So that's my clasp on there. And then if you pull that out, it opens up. We've got these belly bands with the velvet ribbon in here. I did some stamping here. And then in there, I've got these little cards that I made. Some winter scenes. And then this is some embossed paper on the back with these snowflakes. And then I've also got this one. The skaters. And then on this side, I've got, this is a metallic gold piece from an old music sheet on the edge there. And so I've got this antique postcard in there. And this tag that I made again with that embossed snowflake image. And then I've got some punching on the bottom. Here on this page, I added this waxed seal and just layered that up with some old wool fabric and some string. Some old tape on there, made to look old, I should say. And then I've got this nice lace doily in the center. And then on this side, we've got our Maids of Milking. Here, I've got this handkerchief piece that I used for my top tuck. And then in there, I put this page again from the Silver Skates, and they're hearing the story of St. Nicholas. And then on this side of the page, I've clipped on this piece that I made. So it's an old book page, and I just wrapped this kind of floating belly band around there and have the side tuck there, so that kind of holds everything in place, and I just embellished it a little bit. And then in there, I've got a couple of cards that I made. And this one. And on the back, I stamped it with this gold ink. Here on this side of the page, I've got a couple of little cards that I made. This is a sampler page, and I just added some actual lace pieces to the page, give it a little bit of dimension. Here again, I've used photo corners to adhere this image down to the page. And then here I've got this beautiful lace piece that I used for my page. And we've got our ladies dancing. I created kind of a belly band with that. You could tuck something under there if you wanted to. And then on this side of the page, I used this off-cut piece from an old wool sweater for my pocket, and then just added another piece of fabric on there in a button. In that pocket, I've got this little card that I made. And then I used this cookbook page for my kind of floating pocket. And in there, I've got another book page from that Christmas book that I have. This is a page from a floral book that I have. Here I created a top tuck with this wool fabric, some lace, and some red buttons. And then in there, I tuck this piece that I just kind of stapled together. So I've got this image on the front. And then this is a piece from an old ornament box. I've got a couple of those floating around here, and I just added a stamp to the back of that. On this side of the page, I've clipped on this beautiful piece of old ledger. You have to see the background page because those are beautiful too. And then I created this little booklet with our Lords of Leaping image. So in here, I've got these lace pockets on the covers, and then some writing room in the center, and another lace pocket on that side. Here I've clipped on a couple of tags that I made. This one, and their base is an old time card. And this one. Here I use this beautiful piece of lace for my belly band. And then in there I've got this antique rig paper. I think that looks like a French one. And then I created this piece, again, this beautiful image. And then I just did some stenciling on the back on this piece of craft paper. Here I created a pocket. Again, I've got the craft paper on the back, and I stitched on this image to the front. It's our Piper's piping. And then in there I've got this tag, some dotted sari on there. Here I created this piece that goes up and over the page. So this is the front image. Love those two. And I just hinged it with some old French fabric. This is the other side, and I've added this piece of lace on there. And then on the inside, this is kind of a plain piece that could be used for writing. And then this image on this side. Here I've got some pretty lace, handmade paper, and a vintage button. Here I've got a side tuck, and then there I've got this old French envelope from, looks like 1960, I think it was 64. Yeah, 1864, I should say. 1864, so some beautiful old handwriting in there. And then I also added this piece that I made from an envelope. It has this beautiful kind of like ticking stripe on the inside almost. So that's the inside of the envelope. And then I just put this Christmas postcard image through there, stitched around the window, added a label tab at the top. And then I also created this pocket on the back, put some labels on there. And then I've got these two thin little tags here. And lastly, we have our drummer's drumming. Here again, I used some wool fabric for my pocket, added a label to that. I've got this old piece from a date book. I think this book was from the 1940s. And then on this side of the page, for my page, I've got this shorthand book page that I just punched along the edge. And then I've got another piece of one of those old vintage ornament boxes, and I did another stamp across the back of that one. And then I attached to that this beautiful old photo again with some people in their nice winter fur coats. And this is dated 1923. This is came out of a French photo album. On this side of the page, I made this floating pocket. So I took one of those old appointment book pages and just took this piece of plaid paper and wrapped it around both sides and stitched it up the sides. So that made a pocket on the front and a pocket on the back. And then in this front pocket, well, first of all, I just added this piece of fabric on there with some decorative stitching. And then I've got another old menu image from 1899, Christmas menu. I waxed that. And then on this back side, I've got this card that I made, again with some embossed paper. And this is our last page with this nice sleigh image and just some metallic paper trim on there. So that is my share for today. I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, if you're interested, this will be in my Etsy shop. I thank you so much for coming along with me today. Hopefully I'll have some more Christmas journals coming down the next month or so. Until then, bye-bye.